today we're going to be talking about reframing how we think and talk about growing older. I am going to ask that you more or less hold your questions until we get to the end, just because it makes it easier with the recording. But if there's something that you need clarification on, you can feel free to jump in and ask. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's start with our learning objectives. There we go. Okay, so today it is our goal to increase your knowledge about aging. We already know about aging, right? Because we're doing it, but we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the things that we know about aging that sometimes don't follow through with what we think about it in day-to-day life. We're going to differentiate aging from disease or from disabilities or decline. We are going to talk a little bit about ageism. We're going to define that and give an example of what that means and why it's important. And then we're going to describe some strategies to communicate about age and aging in a way that avoids ageism and helps us combat that particular bias. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is we're going to start with a little activity. So on the next slide, what I'm going to have you do is just think a little bit about aging. When I say the word aging, what do you think of? And then what I'll want you to do is go in when I get to the next slide and annotate a little bit. So if you're looking at your screen, on the top, if you go put your mouse up on the top, you should see a button that says annotate. It's got a little pencil next to it. And if you click on that, you should be able to click on a text button and you can type, you can click on a drawing button, you can click on stamps and put little stamps around. So what we'll have you do is just think a little bit and then give us some free response, some free association about what comes to mind when you think of aging. So let's try this and see how it goes. Go ahead and use those annotation buttons when you're ready. Okay, I'm seeing some words come in. I'm going to move stuff around a little bit so they're not overlapping. If I can do that. Oops, sorry. Okay, I'm seeing opportunity and experience, becoming a grandparent, wisdom, getting older, disability, wrinkles, slowing down, aches and pains, me too, health conditions, travel, sharing knowledge. There's a lot of good stuff coming in here. And I see some people still typing, so I'm going to give people a moment to finish up and then we'll move forward here. All right, so I'm seeing a lot of really interesting things here. I'm seeing a lot of really positive associations here, like freedom and sharing knowledge and wisdom and grandparenting, retirement. I'm also seeing some other things like being lonely, disabilities, wrinkles, aches and pains, slowing down. And it turns out that the things that you all are plugging in here, we can go ahead and stop annotating and clear the annotations because we're going to go on to the next slide here. The things that you all are connecting to are really similar to the things that we hear from people more broadly, other than people who are just in this virtual room right now. So this bar chart summarizes, it's from a survey that was done among a few years ago among people just across the country, asking them what they see as signs of old age. And when we look at this list, we can see that a lot of them are associated with age itself, right? So, turning 65 is what it means to be old. Turning 75 is what it means to be old. Turning 85 is what it means to be old. And that's funny to me because it's something, it's kind of a moving target, right? I don't think any of us ever think of ourselves as old. It's always someone older than us. So, when we're 20, 40 seems super old. And then when we're 40, the number just keeps going up. We never think that we are old. But the other thing that we're seeing here is that a lot of the elements that people think about when they think about aging or signs of old age are things that are related to loss of independence or to health problems. So things like not being able to live on your own, not being able to drive, forgetting things, having health conditions, having health problems. And that does not align terribly well with what we actually know to be true about aging. Oops, sorry. So here are the things that we do know about aging. Aging refers to changes that happen to our bodies, to human bodies, because of the passage of time itself. So examples are gray hair, wrinkles, changes in reaction time. Aging is a combination of a loss of physical resiliency and enhancements in things like mental and emotional resiliency. So what's important to understand about the loss of physical resiliency is that it doesn't necessarily mean that we're getting health conditions, that we're getting frail. It just is a change that happens to everyone. It's totally normal. So the body may not be as resilient as it was in earlier times in life, and it may take longer to heal, but it does heal. And we can do things to help our bodies be more physically resilient as we age, like doing physical activity, like exercising. Strong bodies, strong women, strong bodies is a good example of that. So it's also really important to realize that these changes are different for different people. Some people experience these physical changes earlier in life. For some people, it's later. For some people, it's really fast. For some people, it's kind of a slow change over time. And it's important to remember that things like dementia, heart disease, diabetes, chronic conditions, they're not inevitable, right? These are not things that inevitably happen. They are things that happen to some people. And there's a lot of factors that contribute to it, some of which are under our control, but a lot of which are not necessarily under our control. So the reality is that people do tend to experience more health-related conditions as they get older. And challenges as they age. This is just something that we see. So for example, 4 out of 5 people experience at least one chronic medical condition as they're getting older. It's really common. 1 in 3 people experience limitations in activities of daily living. So this is things that we need to do day to day to survive. It's things like eating, it's things like bathing, things that are really important for our well-being and that just have to happen for our day-to-day survival. And a small number of people, about 1 in 10, experience dementia or cognitive decline as they are getting older. But again, I want to reiterate that that doesn't mean that these things have to happen, right? These are things that we tend to see increase over time, but it's related to a lot of factors and not the passage of time itself. Here's the other thing that's really important. We see positive trends that come with age as well. And this is really important because people tend to forget this, right? So this is from a study of more than 1,500 people across the US, and the people were between the ages of 21 and 100, right? So it was a really large spread of ages. And what they wanted to do was look and see what happened in the younger people versus the older people in terms of their cognitive and physical well-being and also their mental well-being. So we already talked about this. We're not surprised to see that cognitive and physical well-being went down as people got older. We know that that happens, right? But what was really important to me here is that mental well-being went up over time for the people in this study. So the people who were 20 had worse mental well-being than the people who were 100. This really resonates with me because I remember being 20 and it was a really hard time. And I can only hope that things keep getting better over time for me as well. So it's really important. This graph looks at mental health specifically, but they also saw improvements for happiness, for life satisfaction, for stress, for anxiety. The list kind of goes on and on. So there are a lot of benefits that come with aging as well. We know more, we're smarter, we're better able to pick and choose how we manage our relationships, and we have stronger relationships. And these things are true that we see on average for people at older ages. So those are real benefits. Okay, so here's what the experts say about aging. When we talk to experts and we ask them, hey, what do you wish that the average person knew about aging? These are the things that they say. So the first one is, aging is normal and it's cumulative, right? So we are all aging every day, all the time, from the moment we are born to the moment we die. And it's just a normal part of the process. So these are the things that happen to us as we age add up over time, right? The things that I experienced as a child are influencing me today and will continue to influence me as I get older. That ankle that I sprained 17 times when I was in high school, that's the ankle that bothers me today when I wake up in the morning, because it's a cumulative process over time. And I know that I'm going to have to deal with that ankle for the rest of my life. And it's normal and it's cumulative. The next thing to point out, and I said this already, but I want to reiterate it, aging is distinct from disease, decline, and frailty. So we don't want to talk about these things as the same thing, right? Like we don't want to equate aging with frailty or aging with decline, because they aren't the same thing. People can have both aging and health conditions at the same time, but they can also have them separately. So we want to make sure that we're thinking and talking about them differently, because they are different processes. And if we start to conflate them, if we start to plug them in together and put aging and disease in the same box, that really influences the way that we think about ourselves and about other people in a way that doesn't really help us solve problems and help people have the best well-being that they can. Here's the next piece. Aging happens in context. So the things, I mentioned this already, but the things that happened to us or that we experienced or the environments that we were in when we were younger influence us as we get older. And they actually change the way that we age. They change our ability to maintain our health in ways that we can't necessarily control or predict. So the environments that people grow up in, where they work, where they live, where they age, influence our health and well-being throughout our entire life. And the context, the situations, the systems that we're exposed to shape the outcomes that we experience as we get older. So we can't just think about, oh, we exercise, oh, we eat well, that influences what happens to us. It does. That's something that we can control, and we should control that if we can. But there's a lot of things that we've been exposed to our entire lives that influence this process that we don't necessarily have control over. So we focus on the things that we can control and just remember that there's a lot of other factors at play. All right, here is the last piece. And we talked about this already, but just to reiterate. Aging comes with challenges and benefits, right? There are challenges, that things that get harder as we get older. There's also things that get easier and things that we are better able to deal with as we get older. So we have to think about both the good and the bad, the positive and the negative when it comes to aging. So that poses this question. Why is it that we so often see in the news or see in public dialogue that aging is related to negative outcomes? Why do we only hear that negative side of the story? Well, so this is where we get into ageism. So the term ageism refers to assumptions about people and sometimes discrimination based on age. And this refers to things that we think about for older people, but also assumptions that we use for younger people. It's true for people across the life course. So that the term ageism was coined by Robert Butler in 1969. He was a doctor, a medical doctor, and he suggested that ageism appears on both the individual and institutional level. So this is things like stereotypes and myth. Sometimes it shows up as disdain or dislike, subtle avoidance of contact, discriminatory practices in housing and employment, services, that kind of thing. And so ageism is rooted in stereotypes about aging. Some of these stereotypes are things that are supported by data, right? We know that people are more likely to experience health conditions as they get older, but a lot of them are not. And so what's important to remember is that chronic disease is not an inevitable outcome of the aging process, and that these aging stereotypes can be really harmful, right? Other aging stereotypes include things like depression, loneliness, weakness, frailty, dependence, helplessness, so on and so forth, including some things that fall on the positive side, wisdom and wealth being two of the stereotypes that we sometimes see. So the problem with these is that, with the exception of those few and far between positive stereotypes, they tend to portray older adults as incompetent, or in need of significant services or support. And it's maybe true that some individuals do need services and support, and they should get access to those services and support. But we should do that in a way that thinks about them as a whole person, instead of basing it on assumptions that we're making just based on what their chronological age is. So the problem with these aging stereotypes is that it prompts us to treat all people, all older adults, as the same, when in fact they're very different and people have very individual needs and expectations and desires. And these stereotypes don't account for this great diversity that we see in people as they get older. Some older adults are really active and engaged. Some have really significant challenges, and everything in between. And if we don't account for that sort of richness and that diversity of the real experience of people, we're making really big assumptions and putting people into categories and not doing a good job of serving ourselves or serving them. So one example of ageism that is pretty easy to identify is elder speak. Maybe you've heard this term before, maybe not, but you've probably seen this somewhere where someone is interacting with an older adult and is kind of talking to them the way that you would talk to a child or maybe to a pet, like, oh, here, sweetie, let me help you with that. Oh, here, honey, why don't we take your medicine? And that is something that really invalidates that person and just makes some assumptions about their abilities and their well-being and the way that we treat them that is not helpful. So ageism has been shown to have negative impacts on health and wellness outcomes among older adults. So then the question is, why do we believe these things, right? Like, why are these stereotypes present in our communities? So for one thing, there's been rapid population change. The proportion of our population that is made up of older adults is getting bigger and bigger. You think of the baby boom and how the boomers are reaching their older adult years now. That's something that is different from what we've seen in a lot of our history. Never before have we had so many older residents of our communities. So that's something that influences the way that we interact. The second thing is that adults have a really long lifespan now. We're getting older, we're living longer, we're living healthier, but it also means that there's a larger chunk of time where we do have health decline. And so one of the things that we can be trying to do is to make the healthy years as long as possible and make the most of the years that we have with our quality of life, even if we're experiencing chronic health conditions, which a lot of us do. So we learn from our families about what to do with aging, right? We learn from our families and from our experiences how we treat people and how people age. And so that can influence the way that we think about it. So someone who has a family history of having family members with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, they might have a different assumptions about what happens as we age than someone who has different lived experiences. And then we see these things come up in the media all the time, which just reinforces the way that we're thinking about age. Okay, so let's talk about why this is important, because maybe it's not immediately clear. First of all, our thinking shapes our language and our language shapes our thinking. So the words that we use are influenced by the assumptions that we make, and they influence how we continue to think about it. Every time we lose our keys and refer to it as a senior moment, we're reinforcing these stereotypes for ourselves and for other people. And so we start to believe these things in a way that maybe we didn't to begin with, which contributes to thinking about other people that way, but also thinking about ourselves that way, right? And I would argue that's something that we call internalized ageism. I would argue that internalized ageism is actually a really huge problem for our well-being because it causes us to think about ourselves in relation to these stereotypes instead of kind of embracing all the wonderful messiness of real world living, of real people in the real world. And that kind of association can lead us to all kinds of irrational and self-defeating behaviors, refusing to ask for help, refusing to do things that can make our lives easier because it makes us think of ourselves as old. Whereas if we didn't have these internalized beliefs about age and what that means, we might be more willing to engage in activities that might make us look old, but that also are a lot more freeing for us. And it can make our lives better. So if we combat ageism, we can help ourselves and others see aging in a more realistic, balanced, generous light. It helps us view aging-related problems, aging-related challenges as problems that can be solved, as opposed to something that just happens, right? It gives us a lot more agency and power in those situations. It can help us foster a sense of collective responsibility. It's not us versus them. It's not younger people versus older people, no matter how you define that, right? Because we talked about the fact that I'm never old, always someone else is old. And that gives us a sense that we're all aging, right? This is normal and cumulative. And we have a responsibility to care for one another and help one another, regardless of our functional abilities. Finally, it helps us grasp the idea that what surrounds us shapes us. And so this is what we talked about before with the idea that aging happens in context. All of our life experiences contribute to how we are right now in terms of our physical and our mental well-being. And if we can think about aging from that context, it helps us be a lot more empathetic and understanding and help to embrace the well-being of everyone and solve problems for everyone. Okay, so now what we're going to do is just talk for a little minute about how we can make these changes, how we can reframe the way we think and talk to combat both internalized ageism, but then ageism more broadly as well. And once you start thinking about these things, you will see them everywhere, which gives us lots of opportunities to practice. So the first thing is labeling. This is something that we can work on, all of us, immediately and make these changes right away. So I'll start by saying that these tips that I'm providing are based on research conducted by the Frameworks Institute, which is an organization that researches how thinking and talking about situations influences outcome and our ability to move forward on problems. So their research indicates that the words that we use to talk about aging and older adults have the power to actually trigger stereotypes in people's minds. So when we use certain words and phrases, that makes people think of those stereotypes, and it changes the way we behave, it changes the way we think about ourselves, and it changes the way we think about others. And so if we change our language, we can make it so that we have better ability to think openly about problems and engage in problem solving and engage in improving well-being instead of falling back into these stereotypes. So if we communicate differently, we can have more productive conversations around aging and older adults. So here's the first one, is labeling. There are some terms that we use to describe older adults. So I'm going to put these up here, and these will look familiar to you, right? They go all the way from talking about someone as a senior or an elder, a senior citizen, an older person, or an older adult. Now, I will point out that some of these terms have cultural significance, right? There are cultures where the term elder is a term of respect. So we're not talking about that situation right here. We're talking about just average usage. There's also terms that are just generally well known, like a senior center. We all know what a senior center is. So that's sort of used in a specific way to help us. It's a term that's really commonly used. And so referring to a senior center or something else might not be helpful if other people don't understand what we're talking about. But when we're talking about people, what we want to do is avoid using terms that make us think of the people that we're talking to or talking about as a particular group on their own. And we want to use terms that help us think about people as people who happen to have a certain characteristic. And in this case, we're talking about the characteristic of being older. So the take-home message here is that we want to use terms as much as we can, like older adult or older person, because that helps us understand, it centers the person, right? It helps us remember that this is a person, or this is a patient, or this is a participant, or this is a student, or this is a learner. And then it reminds us the context of, oh, we're talking about the context of people who are an older student or an older person. So we want to try to use that language as much as possible. Okay, you'll start noticing right away when these terms come to mind because it's something that happens all the time. You hear it all the time. The next thing is to avoid othering. And so othering is when we are sort of separating ourselves from other people. When we other, we're talking about something as if it were happening to someone else. That never makes sense with aging because we are all aging. No matter where we are right now, we are going to be older tomorrow than we were today. And it's not helpful to think about them versus us because even unintentionally, because we will be them sooner or later. So when we speak as if we speak as if we somehow exclude from that experience, but we are going to be part of that experience. We are part of that experience. And research indicates that we can improve our conversations about aging and improve our conversations with older adults and with each other by not othering adults and aging. Okay, so how do we do that? That's something that I've been trying to model today it's really framing conversations and framing information as we are aging, something about we and us. So you'll notice that as I'm talking today, I'm talking about things that we do, about our tendencies, rather than something that they do or their tendencies or your tendencies. Framing something as we and us just makes us all more comfortable in that space and helps me remember and helps you remember that these are all things that we do, whether we intend to or not. And so it brings us all into the experience together. So the next strategy, we're coming back to elder speak. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. And just to reiterate, it kind of sounds like the way someone would talk to a child. I would advocate for not talking to children that way either, but that tends to be the way that we can think of it. So research indicates that elder speak makes people associate with the assumptions that are being made about them, right? It makes them think about older age as being associated with incompetence or being associated with frailty or decline or non-independence. And that relates to them acting and behaving in a way that is consistent with that, even if they aren't in a space where they are dependent or frail or incompetent. So it sets us up to sort of unconsciously act in ways that are in line with the stereotype, even if that's not what we would normally do. We don't want to do that. We want to let people be themselves, no matter what that is. And so if we avoid elder speak, that can really help with helping people be their full selves and engaging with them as a full person. And it's true for ourselves too, right? Like I think sometimes we elder speak to ourselves. And so these are things that we can sort of pull out of our own brain and notice when we're doing them. Okay, so this is the last communication strategy. And it is to address inaccurate beliefs and to address these things in ourselves that we're doing here. So for example, lots of people think that memory loss is a normal part of aging, and a lot of people are really afraid of memory loss. And so one way that this fear tends to come out is through memory jokes. I made the statement before about having a senior moment with losing your car keys. Every time we do that, we're sort of reinforcing these inaccurate beliefs. And if we can stop doing that, we can help to stop reinforcing them. So for me, the first line of defense here is to catch myself doing these things. When I start using terminology that's labeling or that is othering, or when I find myself inclined to use elder speak or behave in a way that sort of infantilizes someone that I'm working with, I catch myself doing that. And I try to fix it. And it takes time, right? This is habits and practice that can be really challenging, but it's something that we can engage in to sort of just catch ourselves when we're making these assumptions or acting in a way that is consistent with stereotypes. And we can take a step back and go, is that a stereotype? Am I thinking about this in a way that is making assumptions and that is maybe not serving the greater good? And maybe I can change the way I'm thinking and the way that I'm talking. When you feel comfortable, and you may or may not, there is also an opportunity to address these inaccurate beliefs in other people. So I find myself very frequently reminding people how frequently I lose my keys and how frequently my children lose their toys when I hear someone say that they're having a senior moment, because it reminds people and myself that we all lose things all the time, and that aging and memory loss are not necessarily the same thing, and we shouldn't think about them or talk about them in the same way. So I kind of use it as a gentle nudge to push back against those stereotypes when I start hearing them. And of course, some people feel comfortable with that and some people don't, but the first step is really to just start catching ourselves in this so that we can use the right language and help move conversations forward through our own actions and our own words. Okay, so if you are totally taken with these ideas, I have a few resources that are helpful for you. The first one is this wonderful book by Ashton Applewhite. It's called This Chair Rocks. She also has a website, thischairrocks.com. I love this book because it's all about ageism and the way that it influences us and the ways that we can combat ageism in our day-to-day life in a way that's really non-intimidating and really inspirational. Ashton Applewhite also has videos, she has blog posts and other information on her website. So if this is interesting to you, check the book out from the library, go check out the website and see if the way that she talks about aging is meaningful to you and it can influence the way that you're thinking. If you're interested in learning more about unconscious bias and sort of the way that maybe ageism might be happening in our own heads without even knowing it, Harvard has an implicit bias test. They have lots of implicit bias tests, but there's one about aging in particular. And so what this has you do is make some associations and go through, it's a fun little quiz that you do. It's really an activity rather than a quiz. And it will help you understand how much you have biases that you might not even recognize, right? That these things are unconscious, things you're not thinking of, which can help us to sort of respond to them, right? To understand where we're coming from unconsciously, and then make those little tweaks and changes to notice when maybe that's coming into play in the way we're talking and the way we're thinking. The third thing that I have for you, if you're really interested in these communication strategies, is the Frameworks Institute website, where they have a whole toolkit on how to think and talk about this. And this toolkit is geared more towards professional communication. So the way that organizations would communicate, the way that we communicate within Extension. But if it's interesting to you, there's a lot of really interesting information about the research that they've been doing, about how communication influences the conversations that we're having and the way people think about a topic, and in this case, aging in particular. And so if that's interesting to you, it's a really fun website to go to and see the way that they're sharing this information, to just learn more about kind of the nitty gritty of these communication frames. And then the last one, of course, is we call this log rolling when we refer to our own programs. This is Extension programming. It sounds like a lot of you are joining us from Extension programming. We've got the Aging Mastery program. We've got Planning Ahead, which is a curriculum that we're just now rolling out, that focuses on planning for the things that we need to face at the end of life. So things like financial planning, estate planning, power of attorney, thinking through what we want our loved ones to know and what they need to know so that they have an easier time when we reach the end of life, because of course we all will eventually. And of course, many more programs. And I'm sure many of you are very familiar with them, but you can always go to your local Extension office and their website to see what programming is coming up right now, and talk to your Extension educators to learn about what's new and what other programs might meet your needs in this space. So that was me prattling on for 43 minutes. I'm happy that you all listened for this whole time. And now we get to turn it back to you. So take a moment and think a little bit about what's still circling in your mind from today's session. And I think we can use those annotation tools again. If you want to type, you can put something in the chat, or if you have questions, we can take some of those as well. I see a comment in the chat. I'm doing it to myself. I would love to hear more about that. Ruth says, can you share examples of othering? Yeah, so it depends on the context, right? It depends on what the conversation point is. But if I am talking about my community and I am thinking about people's ability to age in place, right? Like, can people stay in their homes when they want to stay in their homes? I might say something like, well, older people, they all forget that they aren't going to be able to do stairs when they're older. That's making a lot of assumptions, right? That's making assumptions about people's ability to go up and down stairs as they age, which is very different for different people. And it's talking about, it's putting people in a bucket. It's putting people in a group and saying, these people all in one bucket are all like this. So we're making assumptions about ability. We're making assumptions that everyone is acting the same. And we're talking about it as a different group from ourselves, right? Which is silly, because I have a house with lots of stairs and I may or may not have trouble with those stairs as I get older. And so talking about they and them isn't helpful, because it's also me. It's also me and us. So there's a lot of things in the chat, so I'm going to come through. Okay, I'm doing it to myself. I think I'm a geezer. That's really funny. And yes, we do that to ourselves. I mean, you can think about yourself in whatever way makes sense for you, right? When I said that other people are always old, we're never old. We never think of ourselves as old. That's an assumption, right? That's probably not totally true, because some people may think of themselves as old, and they may see that as an asset, or they may see that as a problem. And so people see themselves in different ways. But when we make assumptions about our abilities based on that, or if we are not doing things that can help us because it makes us feel old, that becomes really problematic. And that's where we need to kind of start working through the way we're thinking about ourselves and catching ourselves when we think negative things about ourselves because of our age. Recently, I was called sweetie. This really bothers me. Yes, it bothers a lot of people, right? It bothers children too sometimes. When people do that to them, it bothers everyone when they have those, when they are referred to in a way that feels demeaning. So that's a really good example of elder speak. And, I think sometimes people do it just because like they don't know your name, or, other people are bothered by being called ma'am or sir. Other people like it. So I think sometimes it doesn't come from a bad place, but it can have bad impacts, which is why we kind of want to think about it and talk about it. Okay, if someone is using elder speak, how can we help them see that there are other ways to speak to the older person? I've seen it in assisted living with the staff. Yeah, so this is where it depends on the comfort and it depends on the relationship. So if you have a good relationship with a person who's doing something that you don't see as being helpful, the first thing is to empathize, right? And like bring in a conversation and maybe just educate them about what you know about this. Not everyone feels comfortable with this, right? So I don't want to tell you, oh, go fix everything that you see, because it needs to be something that's gentle and that's in the right place at the right time. But if you're in a situation where you can educate someone, doing it in a kind and empathetic way is usually the best way to do it. So it might be sitting down with the person and saying, listen, I've been seeing you do something that kind of bugs me and I want to talk to you about it. I know that in my experience, when someone calls me sweetie or talks to me in this way, it makes me feel really uncomfortable. And I see you doing that with other people. And I thought maybe you didn't know. So I wanted to let you know. That can be kind of a gentle way to correct people. You're not going to correct everyone, right? Like sometimes it's not your business. Sometimes you're not in a space to do it. Sometimes it wouldn't be taken the right way, but you can look for the opportunities where you do feel comfortable, or where you're in a situation where you can have that really genuine conversation, and that can help. But I think if we all just start trying to fix this in ourselves, that can go a really long way to combating these sort of stereotypes for everyone, because they'll start seeing other ways to use this language. Oh, in the ER, the nurse aimed her comments at my daughter and not to me. I bet that is really frustrating. And it does make some assumptions about who we are and what our abilities are. And I can imagine that does not feel very good. Acceptance of my own changes in physical abilities is difficult. Yeah, absolutely. It's hard for all of us. And I want to remind everyone, this is something that happens throughout our lives, right? This is something that happens when we're younger and we find our physical abilities changing. It happens when we're older and we find our physical abilities changing. It happens regardless of where we are in the life course. And so it can be a real challenge, and it is hard. And it's something that we could just kind of slowly work through over time. And I would advocate for trying to find the things that we can control and making the most of those things. But that's something that takes time and something we have to wrap our brain around, which can be a challenge and can be a time-consuming process. Will the resources be listed so we can refer to them later on? Sarah or Amanda, I'm going to touch base with you on that.
Yep, the resources will go out. I'll post them in the follow-up mail with the evaluation link, and then again with the recording.
Thank you. So I don't know if y'all want me to read through all of these comments. There's just some really great comments in here. I've been offended when someone asks me if I have a computer. Yep, that's making some assumptions. There's a lovely comment in here about thinking of myself as older than I really am or want to be because of context, because of what's happening with family and what's happening with health and changes to what we've seen as our identity over time. So that's absolutely true as too. Big changes can make us change the way we think about ourselves.
Kristin,
these can be delicate conversations. Go ahead,
sorry.
There
was a question above that I think is important too, is how is the pandemic affecting aging?
Thank you. I did not see that question. How is the pandemic affecting aging? That's a really great question. And I will start by saying that I'm going to say what I think or assume, but I'm not coming from the literature here, right? Like I'm not coming from science here. I'm just coming from what I see. So the pandemic, especially early on, led to a lot of isolation, right? We were social distancing, we were quarantining, and I know it depends on where you were living and kind of what the context is for that. But there was a lot of fear, which I remember very vividly, and there was a lot of separation. And there was a lot of less access to services, right? I mean, that's something that we do see when we look at what people's experiences were. People weren't as able to get the services and supports that maybe they needed. And so that influences people's cognitive ability. It influences the way they think. It influences the way they feel, right? That mental and emotional well-being when we're not connecting with other people, that can be really problematic. Some people love being alone. Some people love just having time to themselves and being in their house, and that's great. That's not a problem for people who aren't experiencing bad feelings from that. It's when someone's experiencing loneliness or is not getting the support that they need and are not able to respond to that. The way I've described loneliness before is it's like social hunger, right? Like hunger isn't bad in and of itself. It just means you need to go eat something. And it only becomes a problem if you then can't eat something. It's the same thing with loneliness. If we feel lonely, it means that we need social connection. And it only becomes a problem if we then can't get that social connection. And if we can't get that social connection, it's bad for our brains and it's bad for our bodies. So I think only time will tell what impact the pandemic has had on aging and whether we will bounce back or not, and in which ways we will bounce back or not. But I think for people who are experiencing needs in particular, who are needing social support, who are needing support from the community, services from the community, for them, for these people, it was a really big challenge. I just othered, by the way, I said for them, but for people who are in that experience, it has been a really big challenge. And I know that for some people, they're worried about being able to get access to those services now or in the future as we're sort of coming out from these ebbs and flows of the pandemic and coming to the center again. So yeah, it's absolutely a concern. And I think only time will tell what we see. Okay, so there's an annotation here that I have not been paying attention to because I've been looking at the chat. I tell healthcare professionals that they need to face me when speaking. Yeah, that's a super great thing that you can do, right? Again, not everyone's going to feel comfortable with that, but if you feel comfortable, you can remind them that you're the patient and that they need to talk to you and that your loved one, assuming you bring someone with you, is there to support you, but that you want to be spoken to directly. And that's an okay thing to do. And I know sometimes people don't feel comfortable with that. Like I know sometimes people feel like the clinicians, the healthcare providers that they're working with are an authority figure and they need to be really deferential. I find that in myself. I find it kind of hard to push back against healthcare providers. But I want to reassure everyone and myself that it is an okay thing to do. You can push back, especially if you're doing it in a sort of empathetic and kind way so that they can hear what you're saying. And so if we make people defensive, it can be really hard to have them hear us. But if we can be empathetic and kind, it can help. Okay, I'm going to ask my co-facilitators here. Is there anything in the chat that I missed that we think needs to be addressed here? I know we are getting pretty close on time. These are just such great comments, and I'm excited to read through all of them a little more thoroughly when I am not trying to talk and read at the same time, which seems to be a challenge.
Kristin, I think there's just some really nice ideas in there of
Mhm.
asking folks to talk to their person, their that they have in the doctor's office, or finding ways to go around, you know, okay, we can't be together during a pandemic. How can we snowshoe together during a pandemic? So there's some really beautiful ideas in the chat is what I think we're maybe missing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. You know, and that's part of that's a challenge and an opportunity, because there are ways that we can think about how we can meet our needs even during the pandemic, when our normal ways of meeting our needs are not the same. And those also change over time. I remember early on in the pandemic, I had a regular Zoom call with my friends and we'd play Zoom games, and it was a lovely way to connect. And then at some point, that just didn't work for us anymore. And we needed to change the way that we were finding time and space to interact, because it didn't feel the same as it did early on in the pandemic, and it wasn't as satisfying. So we can remember that we can find workarounds and other solutions, and that we can be flexible in those solutions and continue to find different ways to do things over